Good evening, gentlemen. I am going to discuss today a topic which is, of course, very important, but not that important now, and that concerns the demise of the British Raj just after the Second World War. This is one of the inexplicable facts of history that the British Raj, the British Empire, collapsed within 2 years of the end of World War II. And I don't think the British at any stage from 1900 ever expected that they would leave India or their empire for the next 200 years. That's a fact. In 1928, the Viceroy opened the old Indian Parliament building. This was a gala occasion, and many of the Maharajas, Rajas and prominent Indian politicians attended the opening. At that time, the Viceroy and the British had a feeling that they were going to be in India for the next 200 years. And that's one of the facts of life. And the British Raj went from strength to strength. They gave a lot of progress to India, there's no doubt about it, but they were the paramount powers. The paramount power in India, and one thing which they did not give to the Indians was sovereignty. Well, gentlemen, at the turn of the Second World War, that is in 1939, Great Britain had an empire that was spread over half the globe. And the saying was, the sun never sets on the British Empire. It was something which had become a permanence in the history of the world. Nobody could dream that such a massive empire would collapse within 2 years. How did it collapse? Now, there are many historians who have written about it, and some of them say it was the magnanimity of the British, which is a lot of BS. It carries no weight. The fact of the matter is that when the battle began, that is in 1939, the Second World War commenced, the British at that time were the paramount power in the world. Their navy was the strongest. They had n number of battleships and aircraft carriers. But the question is, how come such a massive force collapsed within 2 years after the end of World War II? Well, gentlemen, there were a number of factors which came up. And the first factor which came up was the victory over Hitler. Now, it might be something which people are not able to understand, because how a victory over Hitler could affect the British Empire. But that's precisely what it did. While fighting Adolf Hitler, the British energy, their lifeblood, everything was sapped. And at the end of 1945, the British were at the end of their tether. There was rationing in England, and people were war weary, the economy had tanked, and the British Empire was in doldrums. In other words, what really mattered was that there was a Phyrric victory over Hitler. It was a victory which had turned sour. And what Hitler couldn't achieve in his lifetime, he achieved after his death. The second great factor was the loyalty of the British Indian Army. Now, if you go through the history of the 100 years of the Raj, when the Crown took over India in 1858, the Indian Army, which was then called the British Indian Army, had a pivotal role to play all over the world. Whether it was the Boxer Rebellion, whether the attack on Singapore, Zanzibar, and then of course the First World War, the Second World War, the running theme is the British Indian Army, which was loyal to the Britishers. There were a handful of Britishers in India, let's accept the fact, only just about 100,000 of them, and this has been brought out by Dominic Lapierre in his book Freedom at Midnight. At no stage were there more than 100,000 Britishers in India who controlled a population of 300 million. I don't know who's going to explain how this happened, but this happened because of something else behind it, and that was the British Indian Army, which was extremely loyal to the British. So the two things which came up, which I have told you, the British were emaciated of the Second World War after fighting Hitler, and secondly, the British Indian Army became suspect. Now the British had only 100,000 men in India to govern, and they were relying on the British Indian Army to bring about order all the time. But the British Indian Army had other ideas. It had been revolutionized by none other than Subhash Chandra Bose, who had set up the Indian National Army in collaboration with the British, and earlier the India Legion in collaboration with Hitler. So the monolith loyalty of the British Indian Army to the British was sapped, and the new breed of soldiers who came in were inspired by freedom. And in 1945 onwards, it became apparent when in 1946 was the naval mutiny led by Mr. Madan, and many Britishers were shot dead. Officers, I mean. There was another mutiny in Karachi in which the Gorkhas rebelled, and then the British did a mistake in trying the INA war criminals in a public trial in the Red Fort. This again inflamed passions, and the situation became so bad that Field Marshal Auchinleck, who was the senior chief of the Indian Army at that time, decided not to carry out the harsh sentences of transportation for life and others which were imposed on the officers of the INA. Gentlemen, the British then realized that they could not control India because they themselves didn't have the wherewithal to send troops to India to control it, and the instrument on which they were relying to control India, that is the British Indian Army, could no longer be relied upon. These are the two important points that so gate crashed into the British psyche that they had decided that we better leave and go away before we are thrown out. That is the actual fact of what happened. Well, a lot of people talk that Gandhi had done the freedom movement, Nehru was there and all, but let me tell you, gentlemen, these leaders had minimal effects on the independence of India, and Lord Attlee, the British Prime Minister, has confirmed it in a talk in Calcutta much later. The historical fact is that the British Empire collapsed like a pack of cards. It had been built on a mercenary force, and all over the globe it was the British Indian Army which was fighting the battle. Even during the Second World War, 2.5 million Indian soldiers, much more than the strength being provided by France or any other country, fought on the side of the Allies. The British realized what had happened, but they did not give the acknowledgement which they should have given. So when the British came back after 1945 to re-establish control over India, it was all over by the shouting. There were freedom refrains moving around in the army, and the army was no longer loyal, and this was the primary reason the British left India. I believe there was a request to President Truman to send some American troops, but he turned it down. He didn't want to get involved in either China or India in any battle. And the net result was the British went gracefully past the India Independence Act, which gave freedom to India, and at the same time, as a parting cake, made Gandhi and Nehru accept a two-nation theory of Hindus and Muslims being separate entities. Gentlemen, this is just to explain to you what exactly happened. It's a short video, and I hope you will understand it, that the role of Gandhi and Nehru in the freedom movement was minimal, and much of it came of the British own creation. In other words, they lost the battle with Hitler. Lost, I say, because they won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory, and they lost the support of the Indian Army, the British Indian Army, and the British had no choice but to say bye-bye and go home. Thank you, gentlemen. I hope you liked this video. Share it with your friends. Come back for more. In the meanwhile, I'll say Jai Hind, glory to India. Do subscribe to my channel. Come back for more interesting videos and take care of yourself. God bless.